So hi, welcome to the session. My name's Gail and I'm really excited to welcome you to this because this is the one that I've been waiting for all day. I'm not biased or anything, obviously. So look, without further ado, we're going to go straight in and I'm going to hand over to Trish and Emma. So give them your best learning technologies welcome.
Hooray! So my name is Trish Uhl. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. We appreciate that we are between you and the pub, so we're going to make sure that we're providing some value here, right? And make sure that we start on time and end on time. Hooray, hooray, yay, all the clapping. So I'm about to give you an activity to do. Ooh, so this is your heads up, which basically means I know people are trying to shuffle around and manage maybe a beverage, an electronic device, some paper. You might want to get that sorted for a moment because I'm going to have you stand up. Are you ready? All right. 1, 2, 3. Stand up. Now, the next thing in a moment, now not yet, my learning peers, not yet. In just a moment, I'm going to have you pick a partner in the room. Not yet. And give you an activity to do to complete with each other. Are you ready for this? Are you ready for this? Come on. Are you ready for this? All right, hey, okay. Here's what it is. Here's what we want you to figure out, and that is, do you remember when these technologies first launched? We have a habit, because things are moving so fast, of not having an understanding of how fast things are moving, or I think sometimes a real appreciation of where we've been and how fast we've accelerated and how we're continuing to accelerate. So, on the count of 3, not yet, on the count of 3, if you would please, I'd like you to find a partner in the room. We're going to give you 2 minutes and have a discussion between the two of you. When did each one of these technologies launch? 1, 2, 3. Okay, if you can hear the sound of my voice, clap 1 time. If you can hear the sound of my voice, clap 2 times. Fabulous. We have channeled Bob Pike into the room. Please have a seat. Awesome. Are you curious about if you're right or wrong or otherwise? Are you curious? Curious? Great. Okay. Now first, I want to level set on some other expectations because again, things have been moving so far so fast, we sometimes don't really connect with what it means because we have no frame of reference. We lose that perspective and that orientation. So let me share with you some numbers first, and I promise I'll bring the dates up on the screen for you. The first thing is, 20 years ago, in the year 2000, think about it for a moment of reflection. How many people were online? Just think about it for a moment. 20 years ago, globally online. And then now think about how many people do we have online today? Okay. 20 years ago, about 400 million. Now, 4 billion. Significant in 20 years. That's an awful lot of people online. So what do they and we have access to with these technologies that have come into being? iPod, shout it out. What year? 2001. All right. High five your partner, fist bump your partner, hug your partner, handshake your partner. Okay. What about the iPhone? There you go. So that's an iPad. Hello, iPad. Hey, Emma, hit the button. See if that'll... You know, technology, right? 2009 for the iPad. How about the iWatch? 2015, nice. Amazon Alexa, one of the first smart speakers. When do we think? 20. Oh, Sorry, no, that's not right. That's my bad. I'm the one who put the slide together. Anybody know when Amazon Alexa first launched? 2000, sorry? Oh, all right. Wait a minute. Somebody give her a candy or something. Anybody got a mint? That was fabulous. Thank you for that. Perfect. Awesome. Anybody know how many Amazon Alexas were sold as of the Judeo-Christian holiday season at the end of last year? How many are out there now? 100 million globally. 100 million of those devices globally. So 100 million of those smart speakers, just the Amazon Alexa, and they still have the market share. So going back here for a moment, Emma, can you? Microsoft, 20 years ago, had 95% of the market share of the operating system. That was when we were all doing stuff on desktops. You want to take a guess on how much market share in operating systems Microsoft has now globally? Emma? 1%. Why? Because they missed the mobile market. They missed the mobile market. When they went from Gates to Balmer, they missed the mobile market that was going to be a thing. So what we want to talk about today is the next thing that's starting to really launch in learning. And even though it's a technology that's been around for a while, it's really getting hot right now in 2020. Emma, can you tell us about chatbots in learning?
Thrilled to be here, Trish. Thrilled to be talking about chatbots in learning, and you can tell how much fun I have collaborating with this lady here. So, chatbots in learning. We're going to be covering today a lot about chatbots. I want to get us all on the same page first. And one of the things that challenged my thinking when I started working in the space of chatbots only just over 3 years ago now was, what do we call it? So I want to do a quick poll in the room as to who right now, when they're describing chatbots, are calling it a chatbot, are calling it a chat, are calling it a bot, are calling it either a conversational interface or conversational experience, or simply calling it by a name.
So we're going to go ahead and have you. Do you have your favorite device on you? Take your favorite device out, have it in the palm of your hand. We're actually going to give you a survey real quick to get a sense of what it is that you actually call these kinds of entities. So I'm going to give you something to do. Here you go. So if you bring up a regular browser, there's nothing to download, there's nothing weird that winds up on your device. If you go to that website address, so pin.umu.com, and when you get there, when that page launches, go ahead and type in that PIN number, which is 141591, and then click the orange Join button, and that's going to go ahead and take you to just a one-question survey on how is it that you refer to chatbots. And we're just going to give you about 30 seconds here to go ahead and get that done. And here we go. There we go, Emma.
So, we have got chatbot in first place there. What second? Microphone. We're just coming back here. Thank you for that. So chatbot there in first place, and a pretty much leader there on 57%. Interestingly, what I'm finding when I'm working across in Asia, and you might notice the slight accent. Have I got an accent today? I've just spent a week with my mother in Luton, and I think I've lost my Sydney accent in a week. 18 years it's taken to cultivate this. So in Asia, people are generally calling them chats. So that's, it's happening. Round of applause for Asia. Interestingly, some people not referring to chatbots, some people calling them by their name. Now, my favorite in 7th place, conversational interface. I think that snuck into 5th place there, Trish, because yours is conversational experience, we know that. Mine's conversational interface. The reason that this is important to us in learning is because I think people, when we're talking about chatbots, bring in their own conceptions and misconceptions that they have about chatbots. And so, Trish, if we actually just go back to the deck, Let's have a think about where we're using chatbots in life at the moment. So I think the most common area is in customer service. So this is Jess, who is the Australian Jetstar chatbot. And you may have a chatbot that pops up either on your phone or on a website that actually helps you solve queries. Yes, very common, quite commonplace now. Secondly, people are using a lot of chatbots in their homes. Now, quite often these might be voice activated. You might be using, whether it's Google Home or all sorts of devices, or operating it through your phone. Set yourself an alarm, a timer in the kitchen, fast track the ads when you're watching TV. All those kind of things, chatbots are used very frequently now in the home. The area that is really interesting to me in the broader terms of life and chatbots is when we start thinking about chatbots in health. Don't know if anyone has done any research or any reading around this. We've got up here Eliza, and Eliza is the American Defense Force chatbot who's specifically used for veterans that have got PSTD. And the studies actually are showing that the chatbot is getting better results for veterans, especially in the initial parts of a conversation, than working with a therapist. Isn't that amazing? They're actually getting better outcomes through working with a chatbot on something that we would consider a very human domain of therapy. Second area of health that I think is particularly interesting, I don't know if anyone has looked at Woebot at all. Anyone familiar with Woebot? So Woebot is designed to help you improve your mood, designed around cognitive behavioural therapy, or CBT, to help people shift around depression. And you can download that online and have a play around with that for free. Kriti Sharma for AI for Good is using chatbots in health in India to help educate people around sexual health, a taboo subject that often isn't discussed. So where psychological safety is important, in health, we see chatbots really coming into play. So let's think about what this means for us in learning. Ooh. Here we go. So I think when we're thinking about chatbots in learning and talent, we need to be really considering them in three distinct areas. So the first area that people will be using chatbots is probably in curriculum. And that's when people are using chatbots as recommendation engines to help actually sort content, refer content. And a good example of that is Otto by Learning Pool. So that's a very specific type of chatbot that's being used within learning. Secondly, we've got chatbots that are used to help people with their career. An example of that is Micah out of the Watson stable within IBM that is helping people assess their career options, opportunities, what skills they have, what they need to develop. So career is another area that chatbots are being used in. Now, of course, the specific area that we're going to be talking about today is chatbots within coaching. And so chatbots within coaching, particularly around, of course, coaching is designed to take someone from where they are now, where they're trying to get to, behavioural change. We have examples of Procter & Gamble using Lucy, PNG, not to be confused with Papua New Guinea. We have Ecolab that have their coaching chatbot. And we have Coach M that I'm going to be sharing a little bit about today because we've been developing that over the last 3 years. And my hope is through sharing these stories, it's going to help you fast track what you're going to be wanting to do in learning with chatbots. But just bear in mind, when we're talking chatbots in learning, we're talking about coaching chatbots and not the sort of broader recommendation-based chatbots. I want to make sure we're all on the same page.
So we're going to go ahead and have you take out your devices again one last time for early on in the session here. And we'd like to know, are you using chatbots in learning? So I'm going to take you back. Actually, what's pretty slick about this little utility that we're using called Umu is that I can go ahead and change the question here on the fly. And so give me a moment. And when you go back to that same website address and that PIN number, it'll actually bring up a different survey for you. Again, just one question, and we'll give about 30, 40 seconds here to give people an opportunity to go ahead and submit.
where you're using chatbots in learning currently?
Keeps losing connection. The fog keeps losing connection. That's what the problem is.
Can I just see where we are?
Okay, about another 5 seconds. Thank you for participating. All right, and we think it's really helpful to kind of get a sense of, because I think sometimes in learning especially, we think we're the only ones in the world that are kind of going through that problem, or like, am I the only one that's behind, or am I ahead, or kind of where am I in terms of my peers in a cohort? So that's why it is that we think that just doing kind of these quick little surveys in the room can be super helpful. So let me go ahead and bring up the results here. Emma, would you like to debrief?
Not sure at 46%. None yet on 35. So if we add those two together, oh, can I do that under the pressure of the stage? Someone's going to have to help me. 81, thank you.
Hooray!
I'll buy you a drink later. Excellent. So we have got 9% in coaching. We've got more people using it in the curriculum, which I think builds on this whole thing of the customer service piece that has been around for quite a while now, and a small amount on career development. No plans to use chatbots. That may change after the session today, but let's just see what unfolds.
Excellent. So I'm going to take us back into the PowerPoint presentation. So something to really be attentive to here with all of this is we have to make sure, actually, before I say all that, how many people here by show of hands were actually in the first breakout session this morning with David Kelly and Chris Peary and Steve Wheeler? Yeah, and we were talking about emerging technologies. And one of the things that Chris and David actually brought up was this whole idea of we have many things that are converging at one time. And so in having an understanding of how we might use chatbots for behavior change, we have to have a better understanding of the context of what's happening with our people in organizations, right? And also, by extension, what's happening to us in learning and performance ourselves. And that is that there's convergence, not only convergence of these different technologies that are coming together, but there are also other major trends that are coming into play. And what it's doing is it's causing change fatigue thresholds in our organizations, right? And even ourselves sometimes, we feel a little, I don't know about you, but some days it feels like too much. It can feel really very overwhelming. So to have a little bit of context on some of the things that are converging, where it is that we might want to be attentive to that, and we might be able to use a coaching chatbot in order to help people get some white space. But just to set a little context, so in addition to digitization, right, all of these digital technologies that are coming into learning, that are coming into core operations in our organizations, we also have consolidation. These technologies, just like our smartphones, are coming together. So it used to be our smartphones weren't so smart. They were actually pretty stupid, and they still have their days. I mean, I don't know about you and your relationship with Siri, but sometimes I'm over it. But do you remember when phones used to just be phones? Show of hands in the room. Anybody here around my age? Okay, good, thanks. So when a phone used to just be a phone and the internet was separate and that was something that we accessed like on a computer that usually was like locked down on a desk somewhere. But those technologies have converged. And so when we're going to talk about chatbots here, we're talking about consolidation or convergence. How do we bring this into our L&D strategy? Not in replacement of, but yes, and in order to be able to help our folks and ourselves get a little white space here and be able to collect our thoughts. And then, of course, one of the other major trends that's happening is globalization, right? We've got people that are going all over the world. I don't know about you, but for some of you who have been coming to this show for years, and wait, what? 21st anniversary of Learning Technologies UK, right? If you've been coming to the show for a while, we've been seeing diversity in the audience and in the speaker set for quite some time because people have more and more mobility. So these three factors combining together in order to be able to cause these tensions, how might, again, we use chatbots in a coaching capacity to help people get clear? because it's causing some problems on our bottom line metrics. And Gartner's got a metric, Emma, that I think we can talk about.
Sure. And this is a metric in terms of the amount of scrap learning that's happening within our space. Now, the interesting thing is here, we've got technologies that are taking us forward. We're looking at the big picture. We're seeing all the changes that are happening in the world. And yet we've got a problem that we've been grappling with in learning for what feels like years. Does anyone else have that feeling? That we just haven't nutted this one out yet. And the problem is getting people to apply what they've learnt as part of learning. Knowing that learning is not just about the information, it has to be about the behavioural change. And for those that were in Chris Perry's session this morning from the Learning Futures group, he was talking about falling in love with the problem that you're trying to solve. So as much as it is tempting to fall in love with the technology of chatbots, I'm 3 years into my new relationship and it's heating up, it is important to really know what is the problem that you're trying to solve. And for us, this is what it's about. Actually making a difference in learning and stopping learning being wasted. And so whether you call that embedding learning, sustaining learning, transferring the learning, application of learning, it's a really big challenge. And not only is it a challenge now in learning, when we're looking at technology, it's a challenge in terms of getting people to use and apply the new technologies that are coming along. And in the ways of working, where we're trying to get people to adopt new ways of working and change, we still have that whole challenge of behavioural change. So this is an imperative that we really find ways to start to tackle this in a scalable way.
And Emma, wouldn't you say that it's starting to intensify because of these different trends and drivers that are really putting pressure on the organization and on people?
Yeah.
It's getting harder to figure out how to change our ways of working because it feels good to go back to routine and our habit.
For sure, for sure. So, one of the things that I'm finding with technology is, and again, it was being talked about this morning, is really using what you have to hand. And I'm sure in the past, people would have been familiar with using action plans as part of learning. In fact, let's just have a quick show of hands. Who's used action plans as part of their learning initiatives? Okay, a few less hands than I perhaps would have expected. I'm expecting all hands up there. The action plan is quite an old-fashioned tool. You know, it can be done pen and paper, it can be done in multiple different ways of technology. But the action plan is actually about getting people to set their intentions. So let's just have a quick check-in with the room, and you can just discuss with your partner. Just spend a moment thinking about the last time that you used an action plan.
To change behavior.
To specifically change behavior. Why else would you have an action plan?
Right.
But maybe I'm just so close to this. The last time you used an action plan to change behavior, what worked and what didn't work. So just spend a moment thinking about the humble action plan. Okay, let's come back. Let's come back to think about this discussion. And I have a lot of discussions about action plan in a variety of places. And I'm sure some of these key themes will have come up. That people have the very best intention, but that life and work gets in the way. That perhaps we're waiting for our manager to review our action plan with us, and maybe that does or doesn't happen, depending on the situation. And that far too often, now in learning environments, we've actually given up on the action plan because it's so ineffective, which just breaks my heart. So what's this got to do with chatbots, and why is Emma wasting our time talking about action plans? Well, the coaching chatbots that are being used in the space of behavioural change, many of them, and certainly the one that we've been working with, actually has the action plan at its basis. And for us, it's not just about using the action plan, the chatbot to capture the data from the action plan. It's actually using the chatbot to coach people on the action plan to ensure they implement what they've learnt. So the action plan as an anchor between the learning and your behavioural change, getting your organisational outcomes, is the key link.
So how many people here, just by show of hands, have ever heard the term learning transfer before? Okay. I'm going to ask the question rhetorically because I don't want anybody to, feel compelled in the room. So you do not have to raise your hand. I'm not asking you to raise your hand. How many people, again, in your own head, actually have a formal learning transfer plan that they employ at their organization? Now, it's usually a very low percentage, right? So if that's you, then you are in good company. So here's, as Emma's saying, a way of being able to bridge, being able to go from instruction, right, into implementation. That's what we would call learning transfer. And as a matter of fact, scrap learning, that metric from CEB, which is now Gartner, is actually all about a quality metric, right? So scrap learning is how much learning doesn't actually transfer from the training environment into the operational environment, doesn't actually get put into action. So what Emma's suggesting here with her work with your team, even before chatbots, since like 2002, your global team of specialists around the world has been leveraging these action plans in order to be able to move people from that instructional piece to the implementation piece. I want you to think about this for a moment in terms of environments. So we used to have training environment was separate from the operational or work environment, which is where it is. We'd want people to take what they learned in training and apply it back on the job. But in order for that to happen, there's another environment that they have to go through, and that environment is uniquely human. It's our internal environment. It's our internal state. And so if we as learning professionals are not helping people manage all three of those environments, how do we create effective training? How do we help them implement? And how do we help them take this and integrate it internally, right? So this is where you get into the learning sciences. This is where we get into neuroscience. How do people take what they learned in that training environment, regardless of the delivery method, and make it their own and decide to take action on it? So we, as learning professionals, can start to look at this through the lens of not only understanding that these three environments are necessary to that process, but if we take a look at it from the lens of an engineer, we're looking at potential risk or points of failure. So if we have great instruction, but no way of helping people to select what it is that they're going to take from the instruction and then support to help them put that into action back on the job, then chances are slim that they're going to be able to take what they learned and actually put it to benefit back on the job. So how do we make sure that we mitigate against those points of failure? And part of that bridge is the action plan, and part of the bridge with the action plan is then having the chatbot coach people against that particular action plan. Does this make some sense? Yep. So that you start avoiding those bits of failure. And you can take a look at the Neuroscience Leadership Institute based out of New York. You may have heard of David Rock. Do you guys know David Rock's work? So if you take a look at like the AGES model or take a look at some of their research around the neuroscience, how do we make something our own? How do we take something and put it into action, right? How do we decide that we're going to do something with that? It actually has to do, and this is research that actually goes way before the neuroscience, but it actually has to do with that internal state and also the external state. So the external state is all of the stuff that's happening in the environment. Do people have the resources, or are they resourceful enough to get the resources to be able to leverage that learning to change their way of working? And do they have the cognitive conditions? Have they cleared whatever this? When we have people go through training, we're asking them to vet whatever we're training them on against their mental models, against their attitudes, against their beliefs, their values, and we do that inherently. It's inherently human. So how do we make sure that we as learning professionals are being attentive, right, to both the external world and the internal world for our delegates? And Emma's got a process for this.
So this is an example of our turning learning into action process, but really it's whatever is the process that you're using for learning transfer. So people will have similar processes or processes that they already have in place in their organization. But I really invite you to say, within the current process we have for learning transfer, where have we got conversations, and where can chatbots or conversational experiences be useful in this space? And so we had been working with this model for 17 years before coming into the space of working with chatbots, and essentially where we had reflective conversations happening in the orange spaces here. We're now in the position where we can have people having reflective conversations with a chatbot. And you can see on this flow here, you have some kind of learning event anchored by the action plan, which is kind of the bridge between the learning and what is actually happening. Now, wherever that learning takes place. And then you have learning breaks, or as we used to call them, turning learning into action conversations, which to many in this room could say, Emma, you could just simplify that and call it a coaching conversation. So turning learning into action has a very, very strong coaching component at its core, designed for very short, sharp interventions and conversations, to then flow through into evaluation. Now, of course, evaluation is no longer linear. The data is actually created throughout the whole process. But in the very beginning, when we were creating the model, we were very much evaluating at the end. Trish, I now know better. I now know better. So this really is an example of the type of process you can have to help create the behavioral change part of learning.
And if you're going to use a chatbot, you need to have a process, right? So you need to actually have something that you've already got, or something that it is that if there's a coaching methodology that you can use in order to put into a chatbot. And we're going to talk at the end of the session about, do you create your own chatbot? Do you buy a chatbot? Like, how does that work? Like, what's sort of the availability of these coaching kind of chatbots? But in this particular case, moving on to the next slide, so Emma, you're going to talk about how the chatbot is inserted in that flow, and what does that look like?
Yeah. So essentially, as a coaching tool, it helps people to guide on their specific reflections and their specific action plan. And because we're using the action plan that's actually created by the individual, the conversation and the experience is tailored to the individual. And as it's about helping that individual have a conversation with themselves, which is one of the key lessons we will no doubt divert onto later. So one of the key things within this type of conversation with a chatbot is how easy you get people into the conversation in a frictionless way. So for most of the most typical way we're actually deploying our chatbot is through SMS, because people have their phone with them almost the whole time. It is an extension of ourselves. And in terms of the SMS text message process, people are just so familiar with that. Again, you don't have to download anything onto your phone. It's just a really easy way to have a chatbot conversation. The other option, of course, is your online platforms with things like the Microsoft Team chat function within Teams, with things like Viber, Telegram, and there's nuances to where in the world it is best to have your platform situated, depending on where your participants or your learners typically have those conversations. Okay? So all the time, it's not about the technology, it's about where are people typically chatting with people via words. That's where we want to be positioning the chatbots.
Because we're trying to give people space, and so go where these conversations are already happening on devices and using technology that they're already familiar with and comfortable with, so that, again, like you said, Emma, remove the friction.
Yeah.
Right. Should we take a look at a break?
Let's.
Well, before we get there.
But before we get there. So I think one of the important things, and I don't know about you guys in the audience here, but when I first started in this space, I was thinking, how do I actually create what we know works in our coaching methodology and put it into a chatbot? And so we already have the experience And for us, it's around 20,000 one-on-one specific conversations in this space. And so what we can do is we can take our learning from these conversations and use that to train the chatbot that can then go on and start to replicate and have similar conversations, not the same, that people would have with a person. And within it, you would actually create multiple pathways. And in fact, 120 conversational pathways, the more I do this work, the more I see, actually that's just the tip of the iceberg, and that was kind of a rough estimation at one point of time. But as we actually grow the conversation and the data set, you actually have more and more alternatives and more options within the conversations, okay? So this is starting to think about how are you going to create conversational frameworks within your chatbot based on what you already know as experts about your field of conversation, learning, or coaching.
Yeah, and the two other chatbots that Emma mentioned previously, so one is Procter & Gamble has a chatbot called Lucy. You can find that case study online. We're also happy to send you a link. Ecolab also has a chatbot, and both of those chatbots are also coaching chatbots for learning transfer. So we're finding one of the, in the occasion that you find a chatbot that's available for coaching, it's usually that's fit for purpose for specifically that. And as Emma has said, you need both that coaching methodology then to help people through that transfer experience, in addition to how does that conversation actually flow, right? And in this particular case, there's a specific way that Coach M, your chatbot, Emma, works in that conversation flow.
Yeah, so we talk about people taking a learning break. And so a learning break for us is like people grabbing their coffee, grabbing their mobile phone, and sitting down and having a chat with Coach M. With the idea being that we want to get people into that reflective space where they're having that conversation with themselves, and the chatbot is used to stimulate that conversation. So the learning break is the term that we're using to kind of frame up for people. This is how you use this technology. This is how you use this conversation.
And if you think back to when we talked about before, your own experiences with a chatbot in any kind of context, the worst thing about chatbots when you have a bad experience is when it just doesn't feel authentic. And oftentimes it doesn't feel authentic because the conversation feels off. So we're going to take a look at what does a short bit of a conversation with a coaching chatbot like Coach M look like. Sound good? So, thank you. So if Hugh here were to sit down and actually take his learning break with Coach M, and he would schedule this with Coach M in the same way that he would have scheduled with one of Emma's Turning Learning into Action specialists, right? So whether human or a chatbot, the whole name of the game in this case with a coaching conversation and that reflective practice is to make the time and the space to be attentive. And how long do these conversations typically last when somebody takes a learning break?
So it's around 20 to 30 minutes.
So we're not going to spend 20 to 30 minutes with Hugh here in Coach M, but we'll do a little snippet here just so that you can kind of get a sense of what this looks like. Ready? Something's happening. So Coach M is in the blue, and Hugh is responding to Coach M in the orange. So Emma, before we move on from this, just this experience, I mean, this is scripted, but where does NLP fall into this?
So Trish likes to throw out the technical questions. Thank you, Trish. Love it. So in terms of the NLP, what we're finding is we want to give people real certainty that the conversation is going to flow, and that's an easy conversation without any nuances or misunderstanding, okay? So for us, we're very much programming into the responses that we can see and we can predict that are easy to pull out of a conversation.
So the conversational flow with Emma and her team,
Yeah.
thanks for that, actually is scripted, like we're going to ask this, again, based on that methodology, the turning learning into action, here's what a coaching conversation kind of looks like. But in order for the chatbot to understand intent without you having to script it 6 ways to Sunday, if they phrase it like this, if they phrase it like that, if they use this word, if they use that word, because that's part of why chatbots are becoming popular now, is because of the way that it's able to process language. And that's the artificial intelligence piece up front. These chatbots don't go wild like Tay from Microsoft that was like on Twitter and caused all kinds of havoc because it learned bad words. These chatbots are very specific towards compliance. They can't start talking about crazy stuff. You can't have somebody in the organization, they're not programmatically or technologically capable of sort of learning new phraseology. That's going to be controlled by humans. But part of the advantage with this is that you can actually have really good end user or delegate impact by having the conversation come off authentic, because the chatbot is using AI, it's using NLP in order to be pretty good at understanding human intent, regardless of how an individual phrases something.
And I just want to say something important here. This is just like a tiniest part of a conversation that people may have. So there's a lot of messages going back and forth. But to be able to share this with you, we actually had the permission of the participant that we could take this extract and share it. Because I think for us, it's very important that the psychological safety that drives the ability to reflect and share is in that confidentiality of the conversation, and people then choose specifically what they openly want shared and coming back. I'm getting on to moving us on. Oh. Impact. So here's the story. I love the work that we've been doing because it has blown me away with the outcomes that it's getting. And I was initially very skeptical and didn't think it was particularly going to work, didn't think we'd see the changes and the outcomes. But I was thrilled with the impact when we started to get the results through. And so I was quite happy to leave it at, woohoo, we're getting impact, we're getting behavioural change, this is what my life is about. I then had a conversation with Trish, who of course then wants to turn everything upside down, and made me realise that actually there's more to it than this. And as much as I was excited about this kind of data that we were collecting, and the progress review forms, which is our name for a feedback form that we would get in from people and be able to share what changes they'd put into place, what difference this work had made from them, there is actually a whole nother level that we can add value with here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to take us back for a moment, because I think for a lot of people in the room, in trying to think about how to incorporate this stuff into our own learning strategies or put this into practice, even on a specific program. So Emma, you said you were really resistant. So 3 years ago, what happened that even prompted you to add a chatbot to your practice?
So I'd been looking for a technology. So every mentors were saying to me, Emma, you need technology to stay relevant, all this, that, and the other. I'm looking at every technology I can find. I'm trawling the expos. And everyone goes against what I fundamentally believe in terms of creates behavioural change. And so I couldn't use any of those technologies. I then kind of stumbled across the chatbot situation in an expo, much like the one downstairs, and we're going to invite you guys to meet the mobile coach team, who were the team that I bumped into at a conference 3, maybe even 4 years ago now. And I saw their technology, and I thought, actually, this does line up with my values and my beliefs. And that's where I can start exploring. But I very much just created something for fun, just to see what it would be like. I'd finished my formal meeting with a client, and you have those wonderful clients that you have a coffee with after you've had the meeting. And in the coffee after the meeting, I was showing the client what we were doing. And they absolutely loved it and wanted to run with it. And I'm like, oh, no, I don't think so. Da, da, da. Pull it back, pull it back, pull it back. And of course, they persuaded us to do it. And the whole thing has then started to snowball. But even the initial results from the first prototype, I thought it was a fluke. I'm thinking, why are people talking with a machine when they could be talking to a fabulous person? But there's just a huge number of reasons.
Yeah, and it augments the conversations with humans. So this is not meant to replace coaching conversations that managers are having with their direct reports. This is meant to help people have that performance support period, and it's time-bound, right? So like in the case of Coach M, people are only going to have learning breaks that they schedule with Coach M at their leisure. Listen to me, American accent, I slipped it in there. Got the, pretty good? Okay. Just checking to make sure everybody's still here and not off in the pub. So it doesn't replace the human conversations. It helps actually people spend that time reflecting and kind of get their own thoughts organized about where they're at and what they're doing and what their intentions are and are they making progress or not, and if they're not, what do they need to do about it, so that when they do have a conversation with their manager or with an assigned coach, right, that they can then put a plan together, like leverage that time to even be even more effective because that person's been able to kind of get themselves collected, right? Because they've had that opportunity for reflection. And as Emma was talking about before, like earlier in the session about veterans and PTSD with an entirely different chatbot that's focused on, you know, helping with a mental health issue, we're finding in that kind of research, in that domain, and then also in this research, in this domain, that again, a lot of times for that reflective practice, individuals have an interest in, they'll say a lot more to chatbots than they would necessarily to a human being because there is a level of trust and psychological safety where they sometimes people think that a human being that they're having a similar conversation with could be judgy. Now, I know no one in this room would be judgy, right? And I know that when we're having coaching conversations with people, we're not being judgy. But it turns out, an awful lot of humans, when they're interacting with technology in this kind of way, they do feel like there's a level of safety in those conversations. And so Emma, from the start, even with the proof of concept, with that original client, which I think is really important, if you're going to try this, you want the right internal stakeholder to work with, right? You want the right person and that opportunity, the right project, in order to have that person champion this with you, because you're going to learn some things. This is not something that you get this technology and you put it into your organization and you go, that's it, done and dusted, we're out of here. This is something that's going to evolve over time. And you're going to want to have some metrics to start out with to figure out, is it working or not? And you don't want to have it be too long, right? Don't measure like at the end of 10 weeks. Like there are ways that you can measure along the way over a 10-week period. Because again, something like this with the coaching chatbot isn't something that's going to go on forever. It's going to be cohort-based. So people have gone through instruction. Remember, you want people to have support in putting things into action. They need that integration piece in the middle. They can have their action plans coming from instruction, conversations with the chatbot over a period of time. In the case with Emma's practice, usually about 8 to 10 weeks. And then how do you measure at different milestones along the way? And Emma, you started with these. Can you tell us a little bit about engagement, conversation duration, and conversation depth?
Yes, so we're obviously tracking how much time people spend with Coach M, and also the amount of learning breaks that they participate in, how often they are nudged or reminded to go into a learning break before they take that time, and then the depth of conversation that they have. So to what level are they interacting with Coach M? Yeah.
So there's so much more that we can do on the back end with that too, right? So the very first order of business in implementing a coaching chatbot is to make sure you've got the appropriate impact. Because we in Learning and Performance certainly don't want to roll out yet another technology that people spend an awful lot of time trying to avoid. Doesn't make them feel good, doesn't make us feel good, right? Like nobody really wants to be able to, nobody wants to continue having that experience. So how do we make sure through the things that Emma's been talking about that front end experience, that people have a good experience that they feel like is a valuable use of their time? And Emma's given you some tips so far, and we'll give you some more in just a moment. But on the back end, and this is where my collaboration with Emma comes in, there's so much more that we can do with the data that's generated as part of these conversations. And when I talk about data, I'm also talking about appropriate use, I'm talking about data governance, I'm talking about privacy, I'm talking about security, I'm talking about who has access, right? What kinds of analyses might we do with it? How do we anonymize the data? Because what happens with the chatbot, regardless of the platform that you decide to deploy the chatbot on, Microsoft Teams, text messages, Slack, is that data that's being generated, those actual conversations, are being stored somewhere. So even if you decide from the get-go that you're not going to analyze that data, you still want to make sure that that data is protected because it still exists. Right? Like, we can't ignore that that data is happening. So make sure, even from a minimal compliance, that you're being attentive to that. The next thing is based past impact into insights. We can get into insights and even into business intelligence. And I came up with this little framework about the 5 A's of analytics, right? So how can we use the 5 A's of analytics? The owl, by the way, my company is called Owl's Ledge, the reason being my surname, Uhl, again, American here, in Old German means wise old owl, so that's where the name originally came from. So my little owl here, we can look at analyses that speak to alignment, right? Are people putting together action plans that align back to the program goal? We can look at assessment, formative assessment as we go. Are people on track or not? Actionable insights. What are maybe some things that we can learn from that conversational data that would help us change some things upstream, including our training? For example, if we find a lot of people in the chat that are talking about a specific way that they're using to make progress or get better, how might we use that to improve the training that the next cohort takes, right? If everybody seems to be doing it and they're gaining some traction, why not see if we can replicate it for others? Areas for improvement. How might we leverage the data that we see on the back end in order to be able to improve the chatbot experience? Because Coach M has gone through a number of iterations over the past 3 years. Again, there's no steady state. And then ability. How do we make sure from the data that people are then able to build that kind of capability that's going to help them, again, make these decisions, keep them on track, in being able to change their ways of working. And so some of the analyses that we can do with the data that's generated are listed on the right-hand side. I appreciate that some folks in the room, probably many in the room, are not really quite certain what those are, but these are all standard analyses that can be done against qualitative data. So look at qualitative data to have the same status as your quantitative data. It's as much of a rich resource as our being able to put together Likert scales. Okay? So, just a couple of ideas on visualization. Some ideas on visualization. There are a number of ways that we can then go ahead and visualize those insights. So we can look at risk. What's the risk of people dropping out of the program? We can look at what are actions or barriers or success. Who's doing really well? How might we learn from that? Be able to replicate that with other people? Who's not doing so well? What's happening? How might we use that not as a punitive mechanism, but as a diagnostic in order to be able to provide more intervention and help them out? So Emma, in that combination of tech and touch, we've talked a lot about the technology that's behind it. We've talked now a bit about the data. So tell us about this quadrant here.
So this is quite interesting in terms of if you have high tech, you're now in the position where we can offer a scalable way to deliver coaching. In terms of a human proposition, as much as we want to think a one-on-one coaching conversation is scalable, or even group conversations are scalable, it's never going to be as scalable as if we have high tech. The interesting thing is, though, that within the high tech, we often think that actually that is never going to replace or be as good as a human conversation. And the coaches in this room would probably be like me and deny that it's or could quite often deny that it's even possible to replicate that kind of conversation. And so this is where I had challenged my own thinking around what's actually possible, because the benefits of the high tech, the psychological safety and the consistency, the fact that people can have that conversation anytime, anywhere, in some ways it's offsetting what we can bring as a human. But this is the really exciting part, is when what we see with a lot of the best AI at the moment is where you can augment the human offering and the coaching, the technology offering, to actually bring together the best of both worlds.
And do it at scale.
At scale, yeah.
Yeah, so that we can take it beyond just the executive coaching, but into people who could really use it.
And so a lot of the time we started off thinking it was either or, and now we're very much seeing it as an and together. Great. Now I'm going to, who needs to know my emotional journey? Talk to me about it after a glass of wine this evening. I think it is interesting, though. I want to share from some things that happened with clients that will give you a snapshot. No, keep going. I'm good. In fact, I'm going to stand here. To give you a snapshot in some of the things which I now really believe will help people move forward with their own chatbot projects. So the first thing is really get to know your bot. Have the avatar in mind, have the personality in mind. But here's the thing we learned early on working with clients. You need to give the bot personality, but not too much. There's a scale here. If you have too much personality with your bot, people will want to chat quite randomly with it. So you need kind of a balance between too much personality and being boring, so that people don't want to take the conversation off in crazy directions. So it's a really important one to note, is the sweet spot with personality. The second thing, and we touched on this earlier, is really staying true to your principles. What you in your heart of heart know works within learning, which for us is helping people slow down and reflect and helping people have a conversation with themselves. Do not give that up for the technology. And I will kind of fight my principles of what I know to be true and what the technology can do for us to make sure they all align. And if for you it's not aligning, then I would say don't move forward in that space. However, it's not about the technology, and as we've looked a lot here, it's about the outcome of what is that technology specifically being designed to do. And so I've learnt with some examples with clients here, some people are excited about the idea of using a chatbot. And woohoo, let's go chatbots. But don't do it at the expense of what you're trying to achieve with that technology. So always think about, what is the problem I'm trying to solve, and is this technology, this chatbot, does it fit and help me solve that problem? If it does, then keep exploring, of course. But if it doesn't, then don't just do it for the sake of having the technology fly ahead. So for us, of course, about behavioural change, part of learning. So this is the other interesting thing. And through a lot of work with clients, I'm saying if it doesn't align with your principles, don't go ahead. Of course, we have to have the caveat that sometimes you just need to get over yourself. And so I was completely, bowled away by the amount people were engaging with 3 learning breaks. It is a longer story for over a glass of wine. It's how we ended up doing a project that had 8 learning breaks. And you'd think, who in their right minds would go into a project that has 8 learning breaks? People sitting down 8 times repeatedly with Coach M. You can see here the figures and the engagement we had. There's a reason there's a big drop-off between 7 and 8. We can also see there's some instruction given that people were suggested, actually, if you can only get to 1 learning break, that's fine. Don't worry if you can't do the second. But these are reflective conversations that people are having. And what we're finding trending when we work with participants is that 1/3 of learning breaks are done the day that it is issued to people. So we're actually getting a really high level of immediate engagement, then engagement over time to actually have those outcomes. And it's across pharma, healthcare, retail, financial services, 5 countries, 2 languages.
And 2 languages, yeah.
Let's not talk about the things we're learning about languages. But of course, the engagement is not the outcome. It's all about what is the impact, which we're getting a lot of rich information from the data. And just if we look at the hardware stores group was the 8 learning breaks. The pharmaceutical group was the 3 learning breaks. And that's the percentage uplift of scale of 1 to 10 scores for people's goals as they go through. And these are some of the things that people are sharing. So even if we capture the verbatim comments that people are saying of what they're putting into place, there's some really powerful insights and impact that people across industries are having. Okay, good. And the final thing that I've learned is to, with the participants, or I call them participants, of course they're probably learners, just people, with the people that are working with Coach M, really important to set very clear expectations of what your particular chatbot is helping them achieve and why, and the level to which you can work with them. So although when we looked earlier, we were just looking at that tiny proportion of the conversation, we're actually doing a lot of setting expectations up front. And one of the things Coach M will say to people is, I'm clever, but I'm not that clever. You bring the brains to this situation. I will help you reflect, but you're bringing the brains in. And so that is a really lovely way of actually getting people to engage and not want Coach M to give them the answer to the meaning of life, which someone else is tackling that. Trish, is there anything that you touched on data governance
I think
earlier?
just if we can go to that quick slide right here. So again, it's really about accountability, ethics, and security. This is a really large conversation in any respect on data governance in any kind of learning modality, but just be aware that a chatbot is generating data, and you need to make sure that you're attentive to these 3 areas on the triangle, regardless if we're using the data for analysis or not.
So Trish, we're heading into around 3-4 minutes. Mm-hmm. Should we go to the question?
Well, why don't we, why don't we do that? So I'm going to go ahead and have you take your phones out again for just a moment here, and I'm going to ask you to go ahead, I'm going to send you back to that same URL, and this time we want to make sure that we use it in order to take questions from the audience. So what I'm going to do here is just go ahead and tee this up. What will happen is that once you submit your question, and again, if you go to pin.umu.com and put in that PIN number, 141591, and then click the orange join button, that'll take you into just a little text field, and you can submit a question. And once you submit your question, you'll be able to see everybody else's questions and be able to up or down vote any other question that's there. What'll happen is the technology then, because this is such a big crowd, will help prioritize the question, and we'll go ahead and use the time to answer 1 or 2, whatever it is that we have time for. So go ahead, take out your phones, go to pin.umu.com, enter in your PIN number there, the 141591, and then click join. If you've got a question, we'll go ahead and take the priority questions, 1 or 2 of them, as we move to close this afternoon session on day 1 of the 21st Annual Learning Technologies UK Conference here in London. Woohoo! So about another 15 seconds here. And a note, it often feels good for us to use our phones in a session like this. So how do we as learning professionals help people use the tools and the technologies that they already feel comfortable and familiar with in a way that's going to help them be successful? So here we go. Question number 1. How does the bot handle bad actions that the learner says they will do? Okay, so if we had a definition of a bad action here, we would have to say, so we eyeball action plans as they're coming in, as they're coming into the system right now. So we could actually flag up if it's a bad action. But I think this is partly where we're getting people to set their action plans. We have to trust the learners that they are intelligent. Okay, that they have been through the learning
and they have learnt things that are going to be useful to them, and we trust them that they're going to put them in place. So I'd kind of go, a bad action, who am I to say that that's a bad action? That person knows their context way better than I do. Now, language, bad language, it's another issue.
And one more real quick here.
Okay.
What implications are there around duty of care, observing mental health problems? Is it for the chatbot to fix? No. Well, certainly not Coach M.
Yeah. And so I would say within this, you can actually flag up certain words if you want to be on the lookout for certain words as certain prompts. And I did mention earlier that I think there's a real parallel between chatbots in mental health and health to what we're doing in learning, but it's the context that will actually make that. So we are not yet seeing people trying to use this tool as a replacement for a mental health support. So it'd be much the same way as you'd identify if someone needs to use an EPA, or EAP, as we call them in Australia.
And as Emma said, you can also set these chatbots to be able to trigger off of keywords, right? Decide what keywords that would then send a notification to a human. And you can oftentimes on these platforms jump in and intervene actually through that interface, through the interface of the bot. So there's a way to have kind of a ripcord in order to make sure that if somebody needs help, even if they don't get it, even if it's something really kind of pedestrian, or if it's something that seems like a crisis, you can get an alert really pretty quickly.
Yeah, and we set that up with people for how they reach out to a person so that they can get away from the bot if they want to speak to someone. So yes.
And just know that with chatbots, so there's a number of different bot frameworks and platforms that are out there. You can do it yourself. There are templates and scripts that you can use to have it kind of do it with you. And then there's also a do it for you kind of option. Emma and I are going to be around. We're actually going to be down in the expo hall tomorrow, hanging out with the mobile coach booth, which is at D12. We're going to be at the pub tonight. We really want to thank you for your time tonight. Hooray on the close of day one. Thank you for attending our session.
Thank you, guys.